So, welcome to All Things CBT, and welcome me in welcoming our guest today, Vivian Baruch, who I'm just getting to know, but am feeling very blessed as a result of having the opportunity to see some of her work and to talk to her a bit about the clinical work that we both do and the research that lies behind that work. So, welcome, Vivian. Perhaps you can introduce yourself.
Thank you for asking me, Daniel. I call myself a relationship coach, counselor, psychotherapist, and I'm also a supervisor. I've been in practice since 1981, and I've been using feedback informed treatment for 20 years. And that's the research that you mentioned. So, drawing on lots of data from my clients and my own work, but standing on the shoulders of the giants who have established all of the research and the data to behind this. That's I stumbled on it in 2004 when I got training from Scott Miller, and have been using it since then because it just made absolute sense. Yes, you need feedback. Yes, you need to give your clients voice. Yes, you need to find out what's actually going on, not what we think is going on. Yeah.
Well, I can tell we're already an excellent company doing what we do and creating data sets that we can evaluate such that we can measure what's actually happening in psychotherapy as
Yes.
opposed to enacting something and something's happening, but no one's quite
Yes.
sure what that is.
Yes.
I read with particular interest an article you wrote earlier this year in the Skeptic magazine, where you made a number of statements, and I'm looking forward to reminding you of what you had written and asking you to speak to those points, which I
Sure.
see as lying at the very core of the question of effective psychotherapy.
Yes. Yeah.
So, one of the statements you made is in psychotherapy, the most important factor is the skill, confidence, and interpersonal flexibility of the therapist, not the model, method, or school that they use.
Yes.
Would love
Yeah.
to hear a bit more about the data behind that statement.
Sure. Absolutely. Is screen sharing enabled here, Daniel? Because I could show you an image that I could speak to if that's workable for you. Yes. Okay. So as you can see, this is some of the meta-analytic studies that lie behind that statement, Daniel. And it's represented by this image here from my colleague and supervisor mentor, also Daryl Chow. So I'm happy to send you the links and stuff to his work or to anything that I mention. But this is drawing from Bertolino, Bargman, and Miller's work in 2011 and Bruce Wampold and Immel in 2015. And what they found consistently is that 80 to 87% of what actually accounts for positive outcomes in psychotherapy is attributable to what they call extra therapeutic factors or the client factors. So if you're looking at this image, you can see that that yellow bubble or is the 87%, and the 13 to 20% that is attributable to the treatment effects is broken down into these four aspects. And the biggest effect lies with the therapist. And this has been consistently shown since 1974. So there was a study or paper written by David Ricks in 1974, and Daryl Chow has used this. He adapted this, and the story behind that was David Ricks was one of the therapists, one of two male therapists at the time, supplying or giving therapy to boys in a boys' home. And this study was following up when these boys grew into adults, like the adult outcomes of the work with these therapists in the boys' home. I hope I've got all this right. I think it was in a boys' home. And what they found is that the boys who had consistently seen one particular therapist who they branded the super shrink, you know, they were functional, they were healthy, they turned out as healthy and functional adults. Whereas the ones who'd seen the other therapist were doing not so well in terms of later on in life. And so moving forward, all the data have shown consistently that who the client sees it plays a far bigger impact than the actual relationship, or that's part of the relationship, the model or technique that they use, or placebo or any of the other aspects that are involved in that. So it's the therapist's ability to be authentic but adaptable to each of their clients individually, and not just adhering to their model or having an idea of how therapy should go. It's really who you see is far more important. So it's just like in medicine, the surgeon, the the good surgeons are the ones who are the highly skilled. They're using exactly the same tools, using the same methodologies, but they get better outcomes and less negative effects from the surgery than the less skilled surgeons. And that's what they found with therapy.
Thanks, Vivian. This is most illustrative. Can you give us an example of what some of those extra therapeutic factors are that account for the lion's share of outcomes in therapy?
Yes. And we all know this intuitively, but the research and the data backs this up. It's like who the client is, the supports that they have outside of the therapy room, outside of us as therapists and the therapy itself, their family, their friends, their community, involvement in sport or church, their job, their working situation, their how they are situated in their social world outside of the therapy. So the way that I put it to my clients and explain this is like, on average, we see each other maybe less than 1 hour a week, if you break it down. And that's a drop in the bucket compared to the 167 other hours in the week that the client goes back to. So they're living in their world. That's the extra therapeutic factors, which is what happens outside of therapy.
That does make just deep intuitive sense, Vivian. And I'm wondering if one of the extra therapeutic factors in the research data set is psychotherapy homework.
Yes, it plays very well into that, Daniel. So it's like, and this is how we as a therapist provide a structure for our clients. So, in the intake phone call that I make with all my clients, I'm sure you do similar things. I'm orienting them to the way that I work, and I explain about feedback informed treatment, and that the research shows that the biggest impact on positive outcomes of therapy is the work they do outside of the therapy, which I call homework. And so I ask them on the phone, are you willing to do the homework in between therapy sessions? Because, and I wait for their answer, because if not, I say, I may not be the right person for you to see, because if that doesn't happen, not much change is going to happen. Just, and I use the analogy of a if they go to gym and they hire a coach, if they go to a session and they have a gym coach, and the gym coach teaches them how to use the proper form with weights and the reps and stuff, but then they do nothing between that session and the next session, nothing would have changed. And it's the same with therapy. If they don't do anything from what we discuss and we come up with homework that they will that makes sense to them and that they are willing to actually engage in, that's part of the work. And then we unpack that in the next session. How did it go? What worked, what didn't work? Where did you get stuck? What were the blocks? How can I help you with that?
You had said that the research very clearly demonstrates that the particular model of therapy contributes at most 1% towards therapy outcomes. I'm wondering if you could help us get our heads around that data. What is that telling us?
Yes, it can be a little bit shocking to see that number, 0 to 1%. And Daryl's highlighted it in red because we pay so much attention to the model and the training and upskilling. So, yeah, but studies over decades have shown that all models uh, work about the same. If it's a bona fide treatment, which includes a rationale that makes sense to the client. So again, with this image, Wampold and Emil, they draw on meta-analytic data. And Wampold, they've written a book, The Great Psychotherapy Debate, that was published in 2015. And they draw on this data showing this, that really it doesn't matter. It's all about the same. And the nice little imagery that is attached to that is that this is called the Dodo Bird verdict. So I'm not sure if you're aware of this. I didn't put it in the article, but it's the claim that all empirically validated psychotherapies, regardless of their specific components, produce equivalent outcomes. And this was introduced by Saul Rosenzweig in 1936. And he drew on the Dodo Bird from Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. But this work only came into prominence in the 1970s, where again, studies by Smith and Glass in particular showed that all models work about the same. So it's been around since the 1970s, if not earlier, that really the model is, if it's a genuine model, not just, waving wands or, chanting or whatever, if it's a genuine psychotherapy model, an empirically validated one, they work just about the same.
And this seems to harken back to your saying it's far less the school of therapy than it is the human being delivering it that would account
Absolutely.
for the difference in outcomes in therapy.
Absolutely. It's about it's like, the old ways of thinking about the model comes from the medical model terminology. The medical model way of thinking is we have to find the right treatment in the right dose and, it's predictable. Whereas the contextual model is the way we're talking about. It's the whole context of the client in their life, the relationship the therapist has with the client, the therapist themselves and their adaptability. It's about how humans heal in a social context. It's not the model. I don't know if that answers it well enough for you, Daniel.
That's very resonant with me. Vivian, that's my experience as well, that there's humanity that's on offer,
Yes,
and that humanity, that willingness to be another human being in the room, not some sort of expert who is going to do something to somebody else,
that's
it
right.
is probably the most important element in the work that I do. And
Yes,
I say that because that's the feedback I get from my patients. Daniel, when
yes,
you disclosed that you too had struggled with anxiety, when you told me
yes,
that you had experienced life threatening illness, then I felt like here's someone who can understand me. Here's someone that I can
Absolutely.
relate to. And that's
Absolutely.
about Daniel being Daniel, not Daniel being a cognitive behavioral therapist or an integrative
Yes.
medicine person or a professor of
Yes.
this or that. That
Yes.
won't help anybody.
It doesn't. Yeah, it's the human being. And that's why, rating the alliance is so important and using that data to feed it back straight away into the work because it's so important. I mean, the alliance effects here is the next most important 4.9 to 8% percent accounting for the outcomes, the positive outcomes in psychotherapy. So, but it's the alliance based on the client's view of it, not our view of it, as you're doing when you're measuring the alliance and the clients are giving you their feedback. That's why the therapist has to be adaptable and humble and go, oh, okay, so thank you for letting me know that didn't make sense or you didn't like that. I'm so glad you told me because I would have kept on doing it if you hadn't told me. So I will take that into account and it's not going to happen again if it doesn't work for you. So it's being real with the person.
You had written that how we train and supervise therapists largely has little impact on psychotherapy outcomes,
Yes,
unless each therapist routinely collects outcome data in every session and adjusts their approach to accommodate each client's feedback.
yes,
Would love to hear you speak a bit more about that point.
yes. Okay. And here's where the data can be a little bit, it can actually be, what's the word that I want to use? It can be shocking, frustrating, unbelievable. But really, what it shows consistently again that after the first 50 hours of training, there's no perceptible improvement in outcome. So, for example, some of our students get better outcomes than their professors. And studies have also shown that paraprofessionals with 6 weeks of training get outcomes which are on par with PhD therapists 5 years post training. So that's the first shocking bit that we have to really, it's a bitter pill to swallow. But there's also research by Roos Munier and Goldman and Roos Munier, and they have. I could show you. I can't access it quickly, but I'm happy to send it to you afterwards. They studied over a span of, I think, 15 years or so, or 20 years. I'm not sure. Don't quote me this. I have to look at the data. Therapists with it was, I think, 70 therapists, thousands of clients, where they were, just what they were watching the trajectory of the therapist's outcomes, and actually they found that there's a slight degrading. That unless they're actually tracking their outcomes, getting data, progress and alliance measures, their performance actually deteriorates. We get used to doing what we're doing. We feel more confident. We feel more competent. But actually, the data shows it doesn't translate into positive outcomes for our clients.
Vivian, you had spoken to a an approach called feedback informed therapy. And I was hoping you could explain to our training communities what that is.
Sure. Okay. So, feedback informed treatment is an empirically supported pan theoretical approach for evaluating and improving the quality and the effectiveness of behavioral health services. It involves routinely and formally soliciting feedback from clients regarding the therapeutic alliance and the outcome of care, and using the resulting information to inform and tailor service delivery. So there's a lot to take in there, but it's a wonderful, succinct summary developed by the international, developed by the ICCE, which we can go into a little bit later, and they've just nailed it. This is just basically describing what fit is.
And can you give us an example of what questions the client would respond to, both in terms of the quality of the therapy and the state of the therapeutic alliance?
Absolutely, I can. So it doesn't really matter which empirically validated measures that we use, but for the brevity, the ORS and the SRS, the outcome rating scale and the session rating scale, is used. And this is used in 3 automated online platforms. So if you like, Daniel, I can show you another image about those. Would that be helpful?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the outcome rating scale is the very short, empirically validated scale that I've been using for 20 years. And these are the questions that are asked at the beginning of a session. So you're asking the client how they rate their personal well-being from the last session to this session, for them to take an average. And you sort of, if they can't remember, you just sort of walk them back a little bit. So how was yesterday? How was the day before? What did you do on the weekend? Just so that they can actually bring it back into mind, so that we're not just having them answer in their current state of mind recently. You know, that's the recency bias. We want them to see, oh yeah, there was this and that happened. So you get a rating from the client from 0 to 10. And this is plotted on a graph. Then you ask them about their interpersonal relationships, so family, those who they live with, or their close relationships. And again, 0 to 10. You then ask about their wider social connections, their work, their school, their extended family, friendships, and they rate that. And then overall is their rating, their general sense of well-being, and that's rated. And then this is translated with the online platforms that are used into a graph. So it'll plot it on a graph, which I won't confuse your listeners with at the moment. Let's just stay with this. But we don't get hung up on the numbers so much, Daniel. These are just the beginning of, they're springboards for talking points. So tell me a little bit, once I show them the graph, what did you mean? Say a little bit more so I understand why you've rated it like this, whereas last week it was like that. So how do you account for the improvement, or how do you account for things staying the same, or how do you account for things getting a little bit worse? Please let me know so I understand what you want me to know about where you're at in these areas. So we start there, and after we unpack that, then generally I ask the client, so given all of this that you said, what is it that you would like to focus on today? What would give you the most benefit? So that's at the beginning of the session. Yep. And then at the end of the session, this is the measure, the session rating scale, where we're actually rating the alliance according to the client's perspective, not our perspective. So again, 0 to 10, and they can put this, they can slide this, the scale, the little, the slider, wherever it is that they feel best sits with their experience. So over here on the left-hand side is, I did not feel heard, understood, and respected today. or I felt heard, understood, and respected. The goals and the topics. We did not work or talk about what I wanted to work or talk about today, or we worked on and talked about what I wanted to work on and talk about. The approach or the method. The therapist approach is not a good fit for me. The therapist approach is a good fit for me. So I say, did it make sense? Did what we did today fit for you? And then overall, there was something missing in today's session, or overall today's session was right for me. And then we can use that. If there's, generally the data shows if it's anything less than 9 out of 10, it's up to me to always check. Thank you for saying that. Can you say a little bit more? And if it looks like it's going to be a bigger thing, I'll say, look, I'm really interested in hearing what you have to say, but we are out of time. Would it be okay if we pick up with this straight away at the beginning of our next session so that I can incorporate your very valuable feedback into what we do in the next session?
Fine.
Yeah, and what the research has shown is that reduces dropouts by 50%. So these measures, any validated measures, what they found is actually it increases the effectiveness of outcomes by 27%. It reduces dropout rates by 50% because we're getting the immediate feedback in the session and we can briefly address it, or we can mark it for the beginning of the next session. It actually enhances the retentiveness of clients staying in therapy until change is actually perceivable by them. And what's the other thing? There's a fourth thing here that I've just gone blank on.
The cost
It
of therapy?
reduces costs. It reduces costs of therapy. Absolutely. That's what the data shows. Does that make sense to you?
That makes a very deep sense to me, Vivian. And in much of the teaching and training that I do, I try to impart that deep sense to others who may not be using this kind of measurement in their work and experiencing those results of people not showing up and therapy
Yeah.
ending or
Yes.
therapy grinding on and on and on and becoming
Yes.
very expensive physically and emotionally for
Yes.
the client.
Exactly. And I know in my article I had the stats there about, and I can't remember them off the top of my head because I'm not a researcher. I'm not very good with numbers, Daniel. But yeah, so adult dropout rates, the percentage of adult dropout rates and the percentage of youth and child rates is huge. So that's what these measures do. So if that would be comfortable for you, I can quickly find that in my article, or we could just skip over that if that's just too much detail.
Vivian, you had mentioned the International Center for Clinical Excellence. When I saw that name, I immediately liked it, but I still don't know what it is. What is the ICCE?
Okay, so the ICCE is a worldwide non-profit community of practitioners, health managers, educators, and researchers dedicated to promoting excellence in behavioral care services through feedback-informed treatment, FIT, what we've been talking about, and deliberate practice.
Sounds like my kind of people.
Yes, well, I'm glad you've come across it because it's very important to get in touch with our type of people. Absolutely. Otherwise, we feel that we're voices in the wilderness.
Yeah, I felt that more than I would want to have felt it in the course of my
Yes.
professional life. Yeah.
Yes.
Vivian, you've written about deliberate practice. What is that, and how does it correlate to psychotherapy outcomes?
Okay, so basically, deliberate practice has four pillars, as you can see from this image here. So the central pillar is a coach, and the coach is really important because ideally it's someone you admire, but who also has known outcomes. They've been using data and tracking their outcome and alliance work, and this is known to us as the therapist seeking the coach. And the coach also intimately knows our own work. So they get to know us through our own data and through our recordings that we do of the session, video or audio recordings. The second thing is that we do using the data and using the recordings, the coach and the therapist create individualized learning objectives. And this is unique for each clinician. That's why you can't teach deliberate practice as a model or have a standard approach. So it's based, as I mentioned, on the clinician's baseline data and observing their actual work via audio and video recordings, and then finding a specific small skill to practice just outside of the clinician's current level of proficiency. So I'll go back to that a little bit later. The third part is getting feedback, and feedback from the coach, feedback from the clients, feedback from the clinicians. And there's two types of feedback. There's learning feedback, which generally happens when we're reflecting on what we do in the session. And there's the performance feedback, which is what actually happens when we're in session. So we're getting the performance from the feedback from the client, and then we're getting the coach feeding back to us what actually is visible and audible. But then we're reflecting on how that feedback can enhance our own learning in an iterative process. So, and then the fourth part is we're successively refining the steps that we're using and practicing, which are just outside our current level of proficiency. So once we are confident and competent enough in one small step, and it's visible on the data, it's actually showing, then we move on to the next little bit. So it's a slow process. Sorry, I was scrolling there. That might be a little bit confusing. But basically, this is something that my trainer and mentor stumbled across decades ago. He came across the work of K. Anders Ericsson, who is known as the expert on expertise. And Ericsson has 3 decades of research on expertise across various domains: medicine, sport, mathematics, education, business, different realms. And he coined the term deliberate practice, and it involves focused, intentional, and targeted practice to enhance one's skills and performance. So Scott Miller contacted Ericsson, and no one had actually approached him from the psychotherapy field until Scott Miller had done so. And that's where the whole deliberate practice aspect came to be woven back into the fit community and the fit data, and the two work hand in glove. They really work very well together.
Thank you for that overview, Vivian. I'm wondering if you can share some of the data in terms of the effects of deliberate practice on outcomes therapists would achieve when they are using this approach to training.
I'm not sure that I can do that. I think this is too new. We don't have any data and studies yet on the impact of deliberate practice. Yeah.
Mhm.
So this is probably something that will emerge from the data that is being gathered now. But yeah, we don't have that yet, as far as I'm aware, Daniel.
I haven't seen it either, but I do have the feedback from the folks that I train. And that feedback massively supports this approach that instead of sitting in a room and looking at PowerPoints or watching some expert therapist do something on a stage, to be
Yes,
able to work with a person who understands who they are,
yes,
understands what's adjacent to their current
yes,
skill set and attainable as a next
yes,
step is in
yes,
those feedback loops that you've spoken about. My students and colleagues tell me this is what helps me. I
yes.
do better therapy when I'm doing this than I would be if I had to be the Lone Ranger and do it on my own.
Absolutely, Daniel. And this harks right back to the point that we started with earlier on. The main out of the 13% of the factors which contribute to positive outcomes in psychotherapy, remember the largest impact was the therapists themselves. And it links directly back to the therapist: adaptability, willingness to learn, uh, curiosity, humbleness. Because deliberate practice, getting feedback like that, it can be very humbling. Oh, I did, that didn't go down well. That didn't work. But it's this that actually is training us in the real interpersonal skills that are needed for us to be able to work with this client at this time in this setting. That's the key.
You had written that one of the focal points of deliberate practice is a challenging therapy moment where a patient
Yes,
perhaps very abruptly gives us very negative feedback about
yes,
what is happening, what we're doing, who we are, and so forth.
yes,
You're saying, yeah, that would be where the deepest learning would occur, going right into the dragon's lair there and seeing what we could
absolutely.
come up with to respond to someone like that.
Exactly. And there have been studies done about that, particularly it's a Daryl Chow addresses this. I can provide the link to that if you like later. But it's a difficult conversation study where they were actually looking at um, therapists. They actually had therapists being videoed when they were having these difficult conversation moments with depressed clients or angry clients in particular. Um, and there was a control group which didn't receive any feedback or training in deliberate practice, and there were those who were the experimental group. Yes, so these are the most challenging moments in a therapy session when we have difficulties come up between the client and ourselves. And yeah, those difficult conversations were with clients, particularly angry clients or very depressed clients. They're the ones that therapists generally find the most difficult. Um, and so training in those interpersonal skills is really what is necessary for us to be able to deal with these in the moment difficult situations. A model doesn't help us to do that. None of the theories help us to do that. None of the data sets help us to do that. What do we do in a moment where a client is actually in front of us and they're going, well, nothing's helped. I don't know why I'm coming. I'm wasting my time. I'm wasting my money. My life sucks. Nothing's got better. I feel worse. I mean, we don't get training how to deal with that. or a client who is actually, very angry at us and, or has been insulted, they feel insulted. They're actually letting us know that what we said is, is sarcastic or demeaning for them. It's like no model helps us with that. None of the data. So it's that those in the moment difficult conversations that we need to be trained to have and to be adaptable, to be able to adapt ourselves to. And that's where deliberate practice can come in. They can actually teach us those what do I do in those difficult moments.
Vivian, I so enjoyed our time together. I'm so grateful to you for taking your time with us this morning to share your expertise and experience with our community. I'm wondering if there's anything else you'd want to add to what we've said so far before we say goodbye for now.
The only thing I'd like to add is really recommending your community to tap into the International Center for Clinical Excellence. They're doing trainings all the time, as you are. I'm very impressed with hearing what you've told me about your trainings. So I look forward to, getting the links and the information about your trainings. But that, yeah, just to finish off, how important it is for us to learn to get data, outcome and alliance data with every client in every session, and use that to in our work to inform our work so we can improve and so we can actually seek out coaches who can help us with our deliberate practice. So we're lifelong learners so that we don't just settle and think that we understand what to do and what therapy is about.
Thanks again, Vivian. I'm appreciating that on the lifelong learning bus. I'm in excellent company right now, and I'm already looking forward to our reconnecting again a bit downstream.
Right, love that. Thank you very much.